Charlton Comics existed from 1945 through 1986. The company's most noteworthy period was the Silver Age of comics under the guidance of Dick Giordano. Now, Dick Giordano joined Charlton in 1952 as a staff artist, and then he rose to become the executive editor in 1965. So Giordano was the one who moved Charlton over to superheroes, but he didn't call them superheroes. He called them action heroes. Now, if you want to know more about Charlton's action heroes and the Charlton comics that my mom let me keep, stay tuned for the video.
Anachronic.
Hi, comic book guys and gals. I'm Joe, and welcome to Anachronic Comics. Now, again for newbies, in 1969, when my family moved from Manhattan in our apartment to the outer borough of Staten Island, my mom asked me to cut my comic book collection in half. So I did. And this series is about the comics that I kept and that I still have in my collection. Now, there are many comic book fans of Charlton's Silver Age foray into superhero type comic books. And most of Charlton fans consider the high point to be the Charlton comics that came out under Dick Giordano between 1965 and 1968 when he was the executive editor. Now, Giordano preferred to call Charlton's comic characters action heroes rather than superheroes. Aside from the incredibly strong and superpowered Captain Atom, the emphasis at Charlton was on costumed heroes without superpowers, thus Giordano calling them action heroes rather than superheroes. So, in 1964 to 65, Charlton dusted off the Blue Beetle, a character that they had acquired from Fox. But in 1966, that original Blue Beetle was killed or died and was replaced by a Blue Beetle with no powers. Some of the other notable Charlton characters during this time included The Question, Judo Master, The Fighting Five, and Peter Cannon Thunderbolt. So, let's take a look at the Charlton comic books I bought back in the 1960s and still have in my collection. Okay, well, let me get my glasses on so that I can see what I'm doing. Now, during the Silver Age, Charlton, like a lot of other comic book companies, including Marvel and DC, published war comics. And most of the war comics are anthologies, although there were a few recurring characters, like Sergeant Rock, for example, for DC. So, I have two comic books from the war genre that I kept. The first, and I guess most significant for Charlton, is, let's make sure we get it right, is Fighting Marines. This is number 104 from June of 1972. Now, it was a bi-monthly comic book, and it started with Charlton with number 14. They didn't have a number 13 after they took over from St. John's Publications, who had published the first 12. And it was a sister comic book to other comics like Fighting Army, Fighting Navy, and Fighting Air Force. The series ran through issue number 176, and I think Charlton published a total of 162 issues. The other war comic was D-Day, which came out in the summer of 1963 and was published through November of 1968 as a quarterly magazine. Now, this one's pretty significant because the cover pencils are by Dick Giordano himself, and 3 of the stories in here were written and drawn by Wally Wood. Now, the next comic I have in my Charlton collection is Sarge Steele, Private Detective. Right? Now, Sarge Steele, Private Detective, yes, a private detective, but in the 1960s, with the James Bond craze, Man from U.N.C.L.E. on TV, a TV show that was called Secret Agent on CBS. These secret agent spies and so forth were the rage. And although Sarge Steele was a private detective, he kind of was in the spy secret agent category. Right? This first one is number 3 that I have, and the cover is by Dick Giordano. And you see it says case number 103. And he's got an evil guy called the Savage, was it? Yes. No, the Smiling Skull, I think. The Smiling Skull. All right, so that was the evildoer basically on this one. So they had a bunch of stories in there, and each one of the stories in Sarge Steele, he had a 1, 2, or 3 page story where he exhibited his martial arts techniques for the kids to learn from. I always wondered how many kids may have taken the martial art techniques and hit their sisters or brothers or something with them in terms of practicing them. So again, this was number 3. Next one I have is number 5, and again the cover was by Giordano again. It was case number 105, The Caged Brain. And the story was kind of interesting because the story then elongated and became a story in 3 parts. And so it was a longer story than they had in the past. And again, there were some other stories in there, and again, the martial arts section in this. And the last one from the group that I had, was number 7. Again, a cover by Dick Giordano. File number 107, The Day They Killed Sarge Steele. Now, interestingly, Sarge Steele then, after issue number 8, I believe, continued with his cases, but his cases moved over to a new trade title, which was called Secret Agent. Secret Agent only came out with 2 issues, numbers 9 and 10, which continued the numbering from the original Sarge Steele comic book. And the cover again of number 109, The War Maker, was drawn by Dick Giordano. And it continued kind of the same thing that you saw in the original Sarge Steele comic book, including the judo section in there. The next comic book is Judo Master. Right? This was volume 6 of Judo Master, believe it or not, and began with number 89. This is number 91 from October of 1966. And interestingly, it has a Sarge Steele backup story. The cover here was by Frank McLaughlin, and the stories and interior art are by Joe Gill, Dick Giordano, and Frank McLaughlin. So the next comic in my collection that my mom let me keep is Mysteries of Unexplored Worlds, number 48, featuring the Son of Vulcan. Now, Charlton had some moderate success with the Son of Vulcan, and he was essentially, I think, Charlton's answer to Marvel's Thor. He first appeared in number 46 of this comic book, which was from May of 1965. Now, starting with number 49, the title was actually changed to Son of Vulcan. And the other one I have is Son of Vulcan number 50. Now, here's the significance of this particular comic book. If you take a look down here at the bottom, and let me see if I can get it a little bit closer so you can read it. Okay? It says there that fanzine fans, this was written by one of you. Now, I do recall the specifics of this. There was in Charlton Comics, I guess what you would call essentially a contest, where they had asked some people to submit scripts for one of their characters. And Roy Thomas submitted a script, and this was the result. It was published. But he also submitted a Blue Beetle script, which was published, which I'll talk about in a minute. But in this instance, he was interviewed, and someone asked him which comic book was his first published comic book. And he indicated that he thought that the Blue Beetle script was the first one that he wrote that was published, but his script for Son of Vulcan was the one that was actually published first. So this is the first published work of Roy Thomas. Now, after Son of Vulcan, number 50, the title was changed, and the next character ran for 10 issues within this particular comic book. And that particular character was Peter Cannon Thunderbolt. So this is Peter Cannon Thunderbolt number 1 from January of 1966. The script was from Peter Mazzulli, and the pencils, including the cover, was from Pete Morrissey. So the character Thunderbolt appeared in here, obviously, but also Captain Atom appeared. Blue Beetle, the original Blue Beetle, Dan Garrett appeared, and Son of Vulcan appeared. So they launched him with an effort to keep him going, putting in some of their other characters that were already known in this particular story. So Peter Cannon did debut in Thunderbolt #1, which was part of the action hero lineup of Dick Giordano. And as I mentioned, it took over the numbering from Son of Vulcan. The other comic that I have is Peter Cannon, Son of Vulcan #57, with a script and pencils by Pat Boyette. Now, with the purchase of the Charlton comic book characters by DC, Peter Cannon, Thunderbolt, actually made an appearance in Crisis on Infinite Earths and had a short series that was published by DC. Later on, Dynamite took over and published a 10-issue series in 2012 and a 5-issue series in 2011. Perhaps the most powerful of Charlton's action heroes was Captain Atom. But Captain Atom was actually created by writer Joe Gill and artist Steve Ditko, and first appeared in Space Adventures #33 in March of 1960. Now, Captain Atom's powers are similar to some other atomic-powered or nuclear-powered heroes of that time, including Gold Key's Dr. Solar and Dell Comics' Nuclear. Strange suspense stories featured Captain Atom, and Ditko was sometimes the artist and scripted a number of the stories of the anthology heroes. He was reintroduced in Strange Suspense Stories #75 from June of 1965. So I have 3 copies of Strange Suspense Stories. The first one that I have is Strange Suspense Stories #75, which I mentioned was covered by Steve Ditko. And basically, it was a reprint of the original origin story from Space Adventures #33. This issue contained 2 Captain Atom stories and was the start of the new Captain Atom run. The next one I have is number 76, which again with cover art by Steve Ditko, and it reprints Space Adventures #36 from October of 1960. And the last one that I have is Strange Suspense Stories #77, again with a cover by Steve Ditko, and reprint stories from Space Adventures #42 from October of 1961. Now, you notice here that it does not have the trade. As many of you know, back in the 1960s, when a newspaper stand or a candy store that sold comics didn't sell the comic by the limitation date, it might have been when the new one was coming out, they would get a credit for the comics that they didn't sell, but they didn't send the comics back. That would be too expensive. What they did is they would take the trade off and basically send the trades back. And after a while, I think they didn't even send the trades back. They just certified that they did this. Now, where did I get this comic? I didn't get it from a newspaper stand or a candy store, but I got it from the used bookstore that was around the block from my apartment. He used to sell comics for 5 cents, and I was such a good customer, he would occasionally tell me to go to the drawer where he had free comics listed or put in, and tell me, hey Joe, go take a free comic. And since I was interested in Captain Atom, and I saw this, I picked up this one for free at the used bookstore around the block from my house. Now, thereafter, the title was again changed. This time it was changed to Captain Atom himself. And I do have 3 issues of the Captain Atom comic book. All right, the first issue that I have is number 79. Again, it continued the comic numbering. That's what Charlton did when they changed the titles. So this is number 79 with cover art by Steve Ditko, where Captain Atom fights against Dr. Spectro, all right, the Master of Moods. And this was written and drawn on the interior by Steve Ditko. The next one I have is number 82, again with cover art by Steve Ditko, where he fights against the ghost. How do you catch a ghost? Okay. And the last one I have is number 83, not 73, number 83, again with cover art by Steve Ditko, which is called The Defeats of Captain Atom. I think he loses his power in this story. Now the plot and the script and the pencils on this one was also by Steve Ditko. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. Captain Atom, along with the other Charlton heroes, were bought by DC. So Captain Atom became the inspiration for Dr. Manhattan, who was featured in both the live-action film adaptation and the comic book Watchmen, and also in the series Doomsday Clock. Now, watchers of this channel know that one of my favorite B-listers is the Ted Kord Blue Beetle. Now, the original Blue Beetle, Dan Garrett, first appeared in Fox Comics' Mystery Men comics with a cover date of August of 1939. But in the mid-1950s, Fox went out of business and sold the Blue Beetle and what other characters they may have had to Charlton Comics. So Charlton published a few, sporadic issues of Blue Beetle, publishing or republishing some of the Golden Age stories. And then they revamped the heroes back in 1964. And that's where I first discovered the Blue Beetle. So I do have 2 issues from that 1964 series, which ran just for 5 issues 1 to 5. The first one I have is Blue Beetle number 4, Dan Garrett Blue Beetle. All right. The cover is by Pat Mazzulli, and the pencils and the inks were from Dick Giordano at the time. And the second one I have is Blue Beetle number 5. There we go. Blue Beetle number 5 from April of 1965. The cover was by Bill Fraccio, and the inks were by Dick Giordano. Now, in 1965, so that was volume 2. In 1965, you got volume 3 as a bi-monthly. And the numbers continued from a comic book called Unusual Tales. And it was published from July of 1965 through March of 1966. They issued, again, only 5 comic books, numbers 50 through 54. All right. And the first one that I have is number 50, okay, where the Blue Beetle, the cover artist is Bill Fraccio, and the inks were Tony Tallarico. And the cover basically consisted of panels from the inside story. Did I say this was from July of 1965? If I didn't, I'm saying it again. Next one I have is number 51. Okay, here we go. And so number 51, the cover artist again was Tony Tallarico. This was number 51 from August of 1965. Next one, and you're going to see this one's going to be a little bit different. You know what? Let me use this because maybe you can see it better as a backup. This is not bagged and boarded, and I'll tell you why in a second. All right. So this again is issue number 52. Again with Tony Tallarico as an artist. This one, for some reason, you could see there is on this here, a cut that comes down this way. And if you see, I have it against the bag and board. If you see, the bag and board does not fit the comic book. I tried to put it in. So I don't really know why the cut is there, whether the cut was done subsequent to the comic going out, whether the publication of this particular issue was larger than the other publications, or what the rationale is behind it. But I'm going to have to get, I think, a Golden Age or other bag and board to put this particular comic book in so that I can preserve it better. Right now, I just have it on a regular piece of plastic to try to keep the dirt and other stuff off of it. Okay. The next one is Blue Beetle number 53. And Blue Beetle number 53, again, Tony Tallarico is the artist, and he goes against the praying mantis right there. And the last Charlton Comics that are part of the comic books my mom let me keep is, in my view, another significant one. It's number 54 from February-March of 1966. Cover artist is Bill Fraccio, with Tallarico inking this time. And the name of it, as you can see, is The Eye of Horus. The Eye of Horus. And this is the particular issue I mentioned earlier where Roy Thomas scripted it and said this was his first script that he did for Charlton, and that Son of Vulcan was a second script, but actually Son of Vulcan was published before this particular Blue Beetle script. Interestingly, I just looked at the title, The Eye of Horus. Doesn't that sound Marvel-esque to you? You know, it sounds a bit like a Stan Lee type of title. And so Roy might have been internalizing his Stan Lee in this particular one. So in 1967, Charlton then, and this was part of the action hero versus superhero thing, came up with the next volume, which was Steve Ditko scripts and art for Blue Beetle Ted Kord. All right, I don't have any of them. Wish I did, and they're not cheap to come by compared to some of the others. So, unfortunately, Charlton couldn't successfully compete with DC and Marvel, and ended its kind of superhero comic books in the 1960s. And after 40 years of publishing comic books, Charlton ended its comic book operation in 1985. So a few years prior to that, in 1983, Paul Levitz, who was the executive vice president of DC Comic Books, bought the Charlton action heroes from Charlton essentially as a gift to Dick Giordano, who had just recently returned to DC. And he paid, I think, $30,000 with some royalties to Charlton for those heroes. After the 1965 demise of Charlton, some of these heroes lived on with DC, with perhaps the two most successful being Captain Atom and the Blue Beetle. I'll leave you with one interesting note from Dick Giordano about Charlton Comics that I found in an article by John B. Cook in Comic Book Artist number 9. And this is his quote. "If they had wanted to go head-to-head with DC Comics, quality of the artwork, quality of the stories, quality of the printing and distribution, they probably could have done it at 2/3 the cost that DC was paying. And if they had done that, they really could have turned the comic book publishing business on its ear, but they chose to be junk dealers. They really did." So pretty strong words from Dick Giordano, who was there and probably knows what was going on. So that's the current episode of the Comics Mom Let Me Keep, the Charlton Comics that I bought as a kid and remain in my collection to today. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please give the video a thumbs up. Share it with your friends. Subscribe if you haven't. Be well, and I'll see you soon.